What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the two-handed stamina Warden build in Scalebreaker. So I kind of said this a lot in the past two-handed build videos, but generally speaking you should usually not expect to see two-handed builds pull the same single target DPS as dual wield builds, but in certain instances for Stamina Warden you can actually end up doing pretty comparable single target DPS, not by much. You're still going to end up being a little bit weaker sometimes, but at the very least based on my testing of this build, I was able to pull pretty close to what I was able to pull on the dual wield build. Where two-handed builds really shine is the additional cleave damage that it's able to provide. And so that is really where endgame raiders end up using two-handed builds in situations where you want more cleave, not necessarily single target DPS. So for example, trash fights in any of the main trials, or certain fights where cleave is going to be just as important as single target DPS. For example, Lokkestiiz hard mode in Sunspire. So that's where you're going to end up seeing two-handed builds being used here. Now, I already said this in the other two-handed build videos, but we will not be going over gear, attributes, character sheet stuff, or CPs. That's going to be in the stamina gear video, which should be popping up in the upper right-hand corner right now. So if you're interested in knowing what kind of gear I'm using, what my CPs are, go ahead and click that up in the upper right-hand corner. Pause this video and then come back. In this particular video, we'll just be going over skills and the rotations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So in terms of skills, for our front bar, this is the two-handed bar. We have Executioner, Wrecking Blow, Carve, Ring of Preservation, Barbed Trap, and Wild Guardian. Now you can, of course, replace Ring of Preservation with any other fighter skilled ability or any other utility ability. This is just here for the additional 3% weapon damage from the fighter skilled passive, but you don't necessarily need to run this. Now, Ring of Preservation itself is actually a pretty decent ability to run, actually, so you might not necessarily want to give this up. It has a fairly decent heal, and also provides a minor protection, so it increases your overall survivability, which might be useful in certain fights here. Now, in terms of Carve and Executioner, you can use the other morph of these abilities. So instead of Carve, you can run Brawler, and instead of Executioner, you can run Reverse Slice. With Brawler, you get some additional survivability because you do get an increase, a damage shield, I should say. You will end up losing the bleed from Carve, so you will lose DPS if you decide to go with the Brawler, but that exchange, DPS versus survivability, is a very even split here. A lot of people do swear by Brawler for the overall survivability, especially in trash pulls, where you can get a very large shield going. You can get up to 300% of a larger shield, which would end up being just under 20k damage shield here. So that can be quite useful in trash fights, and generally speaking, trash fights can be quite as dangerous or even more dangerous than certain boss fights. And then for Reverse Slice versus Executioner, it's kind of the similar story here, giving up some single target DPS with Reverse Slice in exchange for some additional utility. Now with Reverse Slice, the utility is you get some additional splash damage. You won't be doing as much single target DPS, it's only 300% more compared to Executioner's 400% more, but the splash damage makes it very powerful in sort of cleave scenarios, so you can imagine just how much damage you'd be doing if you were to hit the lowest health individual with all the adds sort of stacked together. You'd get a lot of splash damage going there. And so a lot of people prefer to run Reverse Slice instead of Executioner for the additional splash damage, because again, the point of running a two-handed build is to increase your overall cleave potential compared to a dual-wield build. So again, a lot of people prefer Reverse Slice, but you could always go with Executioner for the higher single target damage if that's what you're really going for. Other abilities you might want to use instead of Ring of Preservation here, while we're on the topic of other abilities, you could run any of the Animal Companions passive if you'd like for 2% additional weapon damage. Out of all of them, I'd probably say either Deceptive Predator or Bird of Prey would be good options here. Deceptive Predator will give you the minor evasion for some additional survivability, while Bird of Prey gives you minor berserk, which will improve your DPS, especially if a healer is not able to maintain very good combat prayer uptime. So you can go with either morph here. I personally prefer Bird of Prey, but there is an argument for Deceptive Predator for the additional survivability from minor evasion. If you want a self-heal, you could go with Soothing Spores if you'd like. It's going to be more bursty than Vigor. It also doesn't heal quite as much as Vigor, but it is a burst heal compared to Vigor's weaker heal. So I should say Vigor's heal over time, so if you need a burst heal, Soothing Spores isn't actually a bad self-heal to run here. And then in terms of Winter's Embrace, You could, if you'd like, run Expansive Frostcloak or Ice Fortress for some additional Major Ward, Major Resolve, though it's not really recommended to do so, just because you might be able to get this from a Warden healer running Expansive Frostcloak or Ice Fortress instead. Other abilities that you might want to consider running under the or not Fighters Guild, under the Undaunted line, Shadow Silk for the Black Widow synergy. The synergy has been nerfed a few times, but it's still essentially free damage, so if you have a Bobo build in group, or if you think your stamina users will be far enough away to make use of the synergy, then Shadow Silk is a pretty good move to have on hand here for some additional DPS. And then Vigor, I prefer Resolving Vigor over, I shouldn't say Revolving, I prefer Echoing Vigor over Resolving Vigor for a few reasons. So the overall heal over time done, heal per second done, ends up being exactly the same. Resolving Vigor ticks every second, Echoing Vigor ticks every 2, but Resolving Vigor ticks every second for 4 seconds, so it's going to be a little bit of a stronger burst heal compared to Echoing Vigor. Now, Echoing Vigor will heal other people, Resolving Vigor does not. And so Echoing Vigor does stack with other people's Echoing Vigors as well. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS in your group and they're all running Echoing Vigor, you can get multiple ticks of Echoing Vigor going at the same time, basically getting much stronger heals than you would if everybody were just to run Resolving Vigor. So that's why a lot of stamina DPS prefer running Echoing Vigor. Now if you're the only stamina DPS in your group, then this doesn't apply to you. You might as well just run Resolving Vigor. However, I haven't really seen any groups that only have one stamina DPS. Usually it's a mix or it's all stamina DPS, and so Echoing Vigor is the preferred morph of Vigor here. But that's pretty much all the alternative builds you can use in place of Ring of Preservation here on the front bar. Then on the back bar, it's pretty much the exact same as a dual wield build. You have Consuming Trap or Soul Splitting Trap, whichever one you prefer, the Cleave or the single target. Poison Injection, Air Barrage, Bull Netch, Barbed Trap, and Wild Guardian. Since we have Barbed Trap on both bars, you could also replace Barbed Trap on the front bar if you'd like for any other sort of utility ability or self-healing ability. It really depends on whether you want that additional ability slot here. If you do decide to replace this, then you still have Barbed Trap on the back bar, so you should still be good to go. Alternatively, you can just put it on the back bar and then keep Barbed Trap on the front bar, which is going to be a little bit better for DPS because you will get the additional weapon damage on your front bar, which is where you're going to be spending more of your time in a fight. So that's pretty much all of the skills. Now going over the rotation. Rotation is pretty straightforward, not too much to talk about here. The only two abilities you're going to need to basically keep on sort of a dynamic rotation would be Bull Netch and Barbed Trap, and that's just because their timers don't line up very well with everything else. So your back bar timers are basically Air Barrage, Poison Injection, and Soul Trap, all of which have 10-second durations. Air Barrage has 2-second windup with 8-second damage component, so that's why it lasts for 10 seconds. Versus Bull Netch, which lasts for 27 seconds, and Barbed Trap runs for a total of 18 seconds. So a little bit offset there. So really, those are the only two abilities that are going to kind of fall out of line, so to speak, in the rotation. Everything else is pretty straightforward. We are running Maarselok, so we will be bashing after we do Carve. Our primary spamble, is going to be Wrecking Blow up until around 35 to 30% max health remaining, and from there we will be doing Executioner from there on out. So that's kind of how everything sort of plays together now. So your general rotation is going to look more or less like this. Just make sure to pre-buff with Netch and Barbed Trap. Pretty straightforward here. We're not using Subterranean Assault, so we don't have to necessarily worry about that. And when Barbed Trap runs out, depending on what bar you're on, when it runs out, just make sure to recast it. And you can see that I'm using Maarselok after we do Carve here, just because Wrecking Blow does have a cast time, so we can't really do anything during the casting animation there. Once again, you hit 35% health, 30% health, you swap over to Executioner instead. That's kind of a good spot to kind of swap over to that ability. Not only does it end up doing a little bit more damage over time, especially at lower health, it also is an instant cast, so you're able to get a little bit more casts off over the same time period compared to continuing to run Wrecking Blow. And so the rotation itself, again, very, very simple. It's just keeping an eye on Bull Netch and Barbed Trap here. And if you're only running Barbed Trap on a single bar, like I said, I recommend running it on the front bar. But if you want to run the back bar instead, you certainly can do that. And once you see it run to around 3 to 2 seconds left, that's when you want to recast it, because there is a little bit of an arm time associated with Barbed Trap. So before we get started here, I do want to point out that in terms of sustain, I was having a little bit of difficulty sustaining. So I am going to adjust my CPs here a little bit in order to kind of make up for that by putting some points into bashing focus to reduce the cost of bash. So hopefully that will give me a little bit more sustain overall, because we are using Maarselok, so hopefully that will help out a little bit. But if I do need a heavy attack, then I will certainly do so, and I will tell you guys when that is. So, 12 dummy parse here, we're using parse food. This is why my health is so low, but this does give us a even comparison field across the other two-handed builds here on my channel. So don't necessarily take these parses and compare them to other DPS parses from other content creators, because we're obviously not the same person. We have different sort of expertise when it comes to DPS. Instead, you can kind of use this to see where the Stamina Warden stands in terms of two-handed parses compared to other classes. So, go ahead and get started here. In terms of when you want to use the bear ultimate, you can really use it whenever it's up. You have it double barred, so just use it whenever it's up. And bash when after you use Carve here. Now, be careful with Wrecking Blow as a spam bull, because it does have that cast time, so you won't be able to use potions, you won't be able to activate synergies while you're in that cast time animation. You also won't be able to bar swap either, so you want to make sure you time everything so you're not caught in that animation with Wrecking Blow. The other thing to make note of here is if you are using Lokkestiiz on the front bar here, like I have in the gear video, make sure you're activating your synergies on the front bar, so that way you're getting that major slayer. Again, be very careful with timing your bar swap with Wrecking Blow, because you can't bar swap if you're in the middle of that animation. Again, once we hit around 35 to 30% max health, that's when we're going to swap over to using Poison Executioner rather than Wrecking Blow. At this point, you guys should be able to see just how much our sustain is sort of impacting us. We're starting to run a little bit low on stamina here. At this point, we're at 35, so we're going to swap over to Executioner here. See if I have to end up using a heavy attack. I probably will. How well we were able to time everything here. Just gonna keep on executing here rather than re-up our dots. So there we go. A little bit less than what I got earlier. I used to get about 88k or so in the previous parse. Here we got just shy of 87k instead. So not quite as big of a drop between single target DPS. If you guys saw my stamina parse video, stamina wardens on that parse video I think was hitting around 88.5, 88.6k or so. Here we're pulling about 87k, so not quite as big of a drop compared to some other classes here. Part of that is due to the fact that we don't have an active execute, and so we get more DPS out of a two-handed build as compared to like a Stamina Nightblade, which has a class execute. You kind of see the same thing with Stamina Templars. They get a little bit more of a bonus in execute compared to some other classes, mainly because then compared to a dual-wield build, they don't have a class execute. That's part of the reason why here. But generally speaking, you can see here lower single target DPS, but again, that potential for higher cleave damage is definitely what sells the two-handed build. And a lot of endgame raiders who play stamina DPS run a two-handed build for trash in fights where cleave is more important, and then swap to a dual-wield build when they just want to do raw single target DPS. So that's kind of where two-handed builds sort of fit into the current endgame PvE meta. That concludes this video. Hope you guys found this informative. Please let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about the build. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.